Welcome to today's Wednesday webinar, Verification, the next hurdle after the FAFSA. This webinar is one in a series of webinars developed by the Finance Authority of Maine to help students and families plan and pay for college. I'm Nikki Vachon. I'm going to be your host for today. I'm part of FAME's College Access and Outreach team, and we, along with our amazing customer service team, are here to help Maine students and families navigate this whole financial aid process. So let us know what we can do to assist you. So here's our agenda for today, and we have a variety of people tuning in today. So I've got school counselors and college access folks, and I've got financial aid professionals on the line. So we're going to talk about something to try and meet everyone's needs here. So we're going to talk about what is verification, who is selected, why was I selected, how does the student know if they were selected, and then we're going to do a deeper dive into what is required for verification. So let's just break this down with what is verification. So verification is really just a process to check the accuracy of the information provided on the FAFSA by the student or the family. So when a student files the FAFSA, the Department of Education is required to take a look at it and make sure everything is answered correctly, and that the financial aid that is awarded to students is going to the right students in the right amount. So they have this system of checks and balances, and they have this smart logic that they use to try and look for possible errors. And when they find something that might possibly be a mistake, they'll select that file for verification. Then the financial aid office is required to get documentation from the student or the family to see if that information is correct on the FAFSA. And then if the student or family made a mistake, the financial aid office will fix it for them. So who gets selected? We said earlier the Department of Education uses this algorithm to look for, possible errors, but they don't really share that information, because if that was made public, it could really clue in those people looking to defraud the government, how you get selected, and it could help them, get past that hurdle. So they don't share that information. So here's what we do know. Nationally, 22% of FAFSA filers have been selected since October 1st, 2018. Now, I've been in financial aid for a wicked long time, and it's always been, 30% hovering right around. There's been a spike at times, but it's usually right around 30%. Some colleges verify more than that. They might choose a file that something looks a little off to them. So they do have the authority to select more students in that. And some colleges will select 100% of their applicants. So everyone who applies for financial aid, maybe that college has a lot of campus-based money of their own they give out, so they could choose to verify everyone. That's really few and far between. I don't see that a lot, but they do have that option. Super important to note, being selected for verification does not mean they did anything wrong. And in fact, many times they haven't done anything wrong. There's just been maybe something unique with their FAFSA file. Like for instance, my friend has 2 children. The older child went to college. So there was one child at home. The next year, the younger child went to college. So now there's 2 in college, and that change was the only thing that changed with the FAFSA, and they were selected that second year. So it might have been just that something changed, not that it was necessarily wrong. But what we do know is that when a student is in the FAFSA, completing their FAFSA, they have the option to link out to the IRS and pull in their tax data directly from the IRS. This is called IRS data retrieval. We do know that when a student or a parent uses this option, they are much less likely to be selected for verification. Sometimes the IRS data retrieval doesn't work like we would like it to, and sometimes the parent chooses not to, or the student chooses not to use it. Either way, they can get their FAFSA done, but those people who choose not to or don't use that IRS data retrieval tool are much more likely to be selected for verification. So that's one of the many reasons why we always say, if you can use it, please do. It's going to make this process easier for you. So how did this look for Maine students? Well, we at the Finance Authority of Maine collect all the FAFSAs from every Maine student who files a FAFSA because we administer the Maine state grant. We have to know who to give the funds to. So we always like to watch the data and see if there's anything significant happening. We want to watch for potential problems that students might be facing. So we generally watch high school seniors working on their first bachelor or associate's degree. That's our population. We generally keep an eye on to see if something weird is happening. I look back in the last 3 years just to see what it's looked like. As you can see in the second column, the number of students who have filed a FAFSA has decreased. That's not necessarily unusual for us because Maine has a declining population. We do, in the bottom row, you can see how many FAFSAs that have been filed. We do expect that number to be right on par with our 60%, hopefully higher than 60% completion of FAFSAs. I'd love that. But we expect that to be right on par. We're just only halfway through the season. As you can see, we've been hovering the last few years right around 30%. The number has been going down. There's a focused effort to always trying to reduce the number of students who get selected for verification and really just watching our most vulnerable populations to make sure that their process for applying for financial aid is easier. So there is a real effort to make sure that fewer people are being selected. So right now you can see that Maine is on par with the national level. We're at about 22% of our Maine students in that population that are being selected for verification. Now, there is a real effort to get that number down. I think the numbers I heard were like at 11%, which is lofty, and I love it. So let's go for that. Let's try to make this process as accurate and easy for everybody involved, right? So the last 3 columns of my chart here, you can see the percentage of students who are selected for verification who were Pell Grant eligible. So these are students who are a lower income student. They're getting the largest federal grant. You can see from that, if they're getting a Pell Grant, they are likely to be the ones that are being selected for verification. So we know that they're the ones getting the highest grant. So this is the one Department of Education is more focused on because they're getting the funds. So we can tell if you're getting a Pell Grant, you're likely to be selected for verification. The next 2 columns are students who qualified for Simplified Needs Test or Automatic Zero EFC. And I'm going to talk about the Auto Zero EFC in a little bit, but I want you to know about those 2 populations. These are our lowest income students. These are the ones that have an income below a certain threshold. So these are our students most likely to not make it through the process. So we keep a close eye on those students to make sure they're not getting a spike in verification because we don't necessarily want them to have more hurdles to actually getting to college. So we always keep an eye on that as well. So how does a student know if they were selected for verification? Well, after you file the FAFSA, a couple days later, you can log back into FAFSA.gov and you can view or you can print your student aid report. The student aid report is a summary of everything that you said on the FAFSA, shows you all of your answers, but it starts out with a basic, some comments about your FAFSA. And if you're selected for verification, it's going to tell you straight up, your FAFSA has been selected for a review process called verification. Your school has the authority to request copies of certain financial documents for you and your parents. So they know that there's going to be some next steps coming, right? So this is another reason why we always recommend students to go back and look at that so they can tell what kind of process is coming. But we also like to have them take a look at their student aid report just to make sure they didn't make any mistakes. Because if they see, they listed $1 million in their bank account and that's not right, that's going to stand out and they're going to go back in and they can make that correction. I also have a little red arrow pointing to the EFC. That's the expected family contribution. That's the results of this whole FAFSA. Everything that you say on the FAFSA is part of this equation, and this is the end result, the expected family contribution. If there's an asterisk after that number, you can see that that file has been selected for verification. Sometimes the comments can be really long and you may miss that they were selected for verification. You can see it in the EFC. So sometimes the student may not go look at that student aid report, and the first time they are notified about this whole verification thing is when the college notifies them. This is a copy of Washington County Community College notification letter saying you've been selected for verification. Here are the next steps that you need to take in order to get financial aid. We need this documentation. So the school might be the first person to notify the student that they've been selected. So what is being verified when a student gets selected? So, well, the answer is it depends, and it changes over time. So I have here a chart showing in 2013-14, Department of Education been using these verification groups, and when a student's selected for verification, they're put into one of these buckets, right? If the student's put into the V1 group, it's called standard verification. Department of Education says that the college needs to verify the student or household income, the number of people in that household that have to live on that income, the number of people in college, child support paid, and SNAP. Over time, they review what they request and see if it made a statistical difference. Did putting students and families through this hurdle, did it change their aid significantly? I mean, they really look back at this because they want to make this easier for students. And over time, they realized that, verifying the V2 and V3 group didn't really make a difference. So the students that were selected were getting the same financial aid after verification. So they get rid of those two groups. And then they look at different data elements and say, you know what, selecting these things really did not change a student's financial aid. So what we have left are these three verification groups. This is the current academic year. If a student's selected for verification, they're either put into V1, V4, or V5 tracking group. The V1, which is where most students land, is the standard verification group. This is when the college has to verify the household income, the number of people in that household that have to live on that income, and then the number of people in the household that are going to be in college at least half time. That's what the school has to verify. If someone is in the V4 group, this is a custom verification group. The college is required to verify the student's identity. The student has to appear in person and sign a statement of educational purpose, and they have to verify their high school completion status. So verifying that where they've graduated from either high school or got an equivalent, maybe a high set or GED, matches what's on the FAFSA. If they're selected for V5 tracking group, this is what I call all of the above. This is the aggregate group. This means everything from V1 plus everything from V4. So let's get down into that a little bit. Let's drill down a little bit deeper. What's being required to verify income looks different for tax filers than it does for non-tax filers. And I love a visual. So I made a little chart here so you can see if someone's put into the V1 group, if they are a tax filer, we have to verify the data points from a tax return. If someone is a non-tax filer, either they had no income, so they didn't have to file a tax return, or they didn't make enough that they were required to file a tax return, and so they just didn't file. Then the college is just required to verify income from work if they did not file a tax return. So I always like to see things broken out to see, like, what am I looking for exactly, and I love a picture. So how do we verify income? Department of Education puts out a list of what's called acceptable documentation every year. So this is where they say to verify income on the FAFSA, you can do this in one of three ways if they are a tax filer. They can either use that IRS data retrieval within the FAFSA. That way we can suck the tax data in from the IRS directly. We know that information is correct. If they've done this, we've already verified their tax information. Or maybe they couldn't use that IRS data retrieval tool. It wasn't working for them. You can submit a signed copy of the federal tax return. That was new as of January 2019. That was a great day for me. This is one of those things that makes it so much easier for people to get through verification. So allowing the student or parent to submit a signed copy of the tax return was a big deal. So we can now do that. Or, I was working with a family the other day who didn't have copies of their signed tax return because they had lost their home in a fire. So they couldn't use IRS data retrieval. They didn't have a copy of their tax return. So I said, you can send a copy of a tax return transcript. Now, this is a document you get from the IRS that is really just a summary of the information on your tax return. How do you get that? Well, you can do this one of three ways, and there are hurdles with all three of these ways. You can go to the IRS website and you can click on Get a Tax Record. So to get that, you're going to get a PDF that you can either print out or you can email it to yourself or send it to the college directly by email. In order to do this, you have to set up an account with the IRS. They have to verify your identity. We don't want them just giving our tax information to anyone, right? So you have to verify your identity. And the way they do that is by doing what's called a soft credit check. So when I did this, I went and set up an account. I had to verify what was on my credit report. I had to verify who my mortgage was with, and I had to verify what my car payment was on my last car. So if someone doesn't have credit, then doing this is not going to work for them. They can also call the IRS and request this. So I put up the 800 number there. The problem with this is that this is an automated number. You don't get to talk to anyone. They are going to verify your identity by having you input the number of your address on your tax return. So I had to put my street number. But then they're going to mail a copy of that tax return to that address on file with the IRS. I have many students who move frequently, so this may be a hurdle. I had a student who was doing some couch surfing and he couldn't remember where he lived when he filed his tax returns or if he'd even get a copy of it once it was received, so that wasn't going to work for him. We can also use what's called the Form 4506T. This is a form we get from the IRS website. I'm going to show you this in a minute. And this is a form you fill out. You say where the address that was listed on your tax return, and you can have it mailed somewhere else. Great. You can have that, you can either fax that to the IRS or you can mail it in. A problem with this, just to keep an eye on, if you have a deadline to get the verification paperwork back to the school, this does take time. So just keep in mind that this is going to be something that is going to take a little bit of time when we're dealing with snail mail or fax. So you just want to watch your deadlines real carefully. So this is something I learned. I learned something new every day in financial aid, and I just wanted to pass this along. The Federal Student Aid Conference is held every year in November, and they video the sessions, and you can watch them. And I put the website where you can view these sessions, and they're really good, so I recommend watching them. I had learned something here I just wanted to pass along. They're talking about what's considered acceptable documentation, just like I did. And that third bullet down says, an institution may not require a tax transcript in lieu of a signed copy of an income tax return, unless you really feel there's a problem with the validity of that tax return. So we've seen some schools who are blanket saying, we're not accepting tax returns. Institutions are not allowed to do this unless you feel like there's a problem with that tax return you've received. If the school feels like there is a problem, you can say we must have a copy of that tax return, but you have to document the reason why that tax return was not acceptable. So I did not realize that this was a thing, so I just wanted to include this just in case you were requesting tax return transcripts. We must be able to allow signed copies of tax returns. So what about people who file a tax extension? So some people who have a business may not be able to get all their tax documents in order by that April 15th deadline to file taxes. So they request a tax extension and the IRS will automatically give them an extra 6 months. That's called a tax extension. So what about if people do this? Well, normally it's not really an issue because, well, let's look at the FAFSA, the 2020-21 FAFSA. It opened October 1st, 2019. that FAFSA requires 2018 taxes. And if someone couldn't get their taxes done by April 15th, 2019, they had 6 months extra, which would run out in October. So many people got those taxes done, and it's not really an issue. However, some people still need more time after that 6 months. So if someone has filed a tax extension, this is how we get them through verification. It used to be that we would request a copy of that application for the longer than 6 months. But if you can see the next bullet down, the school is required to get a copy of the IRS's approval of that extension. So if we're getting the approval, we don't need that application. You know, like can't think of anyone who would think to make a copy of this. So we no longer need that. So I just wanted to make sure that people are not requesting this anymore. All the student or the parent needs to supply is a copy of the IRS's approval of the extension beyond that automatic 6 month for 2018. We need a verification of non-filing letter from the IRS dated on or after October 1st, 2019. What is that? Okay, so you can get something from the IRS. It's just a statement saying from the IRS they don't have a tax return on file for that person. So I'm going to show you how to get that in a minute, and that has its hurdles as well. But you're going to require that you get this. Basically, it's proof that the student or the parent didn't actually file a tax return yet. So there's nothing on file. We need to get copies of the W-2s or their equivalent. And if they're self-employed, we need a signed statement with the amounts of their adjusted gross income and income taxes paid. So once we collect all that, it really just paints a picture of what their taxes are going to look like. The financial aid office can use that to make sure their FAFSA is accurate. What about people who amend their tax returns? So I had to do this one time. I'd filed my taxes, and then a little while later, I got this other tax document. I think it just gotten stuck in the mail or something. So I had to go back and fix my taxes. So that's called a tax amendment. If someone has done this, they need to get through verification by providing to the financial aid office what the taxes were and then what was fixed on that amendment. So the college is required to ask for a signed copy of the 1040X. Now that 1040X is basically a form saying, this is what it was on my tax returns and this is what I need to fix. So we need to get a signed copy of that 1040X as well as a copy of what the income was. And the way we get that is with the IRS data retrieval within the FAFSA, or an IRS tax return transcript that we're going to get from the IRS. That does not have to be signed. Or we get a signed copy of the tax return. So basically, financial aid office just needs a copy of what was filed and what was fixed. Okay, so let's talk about rollovers for a second. So a rollover is when you take retirement income out of one retirement account and just put it into another one. Now, that original retirement account, when you pull that money out, it looks like you've now just taken some income. But if you put that into another account, it's non-taxable. It's a non-taxable event, but it shows up on the 1040. So if you pull in your data from the IRS, from your 1040, and there's a non-zero amount, you're going to see, I've got a little red arrow pointing to this that says, did the untaxed portion of your IRA distribution, was that part of a rollover? If you say yes to this, you can put in the amount of the rollover because it's not income. It just was money you moved from one retirement account to another. So it's not income that should be on the FAFSA, so this should be excluded. So you can go in, you can say this is the part of the rollover, don't include this in my income. So super important to note that we don't want people to overinflate their income. For my financial aid people, just want to tell you that's going to come into your system with an IRS data field flag of 2. So what you need to do is get a copy of a signed statement from that person saying that that amount was a rollover. So we just need something documenting, yep, that amount was a rollover. Okay, so that was all tax filers, but what about those people who didn't file a tax return? How do we, what's acceptable to get for documentation so we can verify that FAFSA? So what we're going to do is we're going to get documentation on any income earned. So we're going to get W-2s if they had any, or their equivalent. And we're going to ask that they prove that there's no tax return on file with the IRS. So we're going to ask for this verification of non-filing letter. And this is something, again, we do with this with the IRS. It has to be dated after October 1st, 2019. Because this has been such a bugger to get, the Department of Education, as of January 2019, said, if you have tried and cannot get this, you can sign a statement that says you tried to get the verification of non-filing letter, didn't work, and that you have not filed a 2018 tax return and you're not required to file a tax return. Then you're going to list all the sources of any 2018 income, if there were any, in each source. So if you had multiple jobs, you'd say, I made this much income at this employer. If they're self-employed, we need a signed statement that includes the amount of the adjusted gross income and the income taxes paid. So basically for this person who didn't file a tax return, we're just basically documenting their income and proving that they did not file a tax return. Super important to note here, this is only required for parents of dependent students or independent students and their spouses if applicable. Dependent students do not need to do this. The federal government is not requiring us to do this. This is one hurdle where if the school is requiring this, you don't need to do it. And it's one more hurdle the student can get through and make this process easier if possible. So something to note there. So how do I get that verification of non-filing letter or a tax return transcript? So I mentioned the form 4506T. I got a screenshot of it here. This is a form that's used for a bunch of different things, right? So if we want to ask for a tax return transcript, we can use this, and we're just going to check off that box A after filling out the other documents. We need to sign and date this. But also, if we want a verification of non-filing, you're going to check off line 7. There's a box on the far right. So this form can be used for a couple different things. Just want to make sure if you are someone who is working with students and you have this form, can you just double check that you are using the 2019 version? I have the date circled in the upper left-hand corner. There were some changes done to this form last summer, so always good to use the most recent form. Okay, so let's talk about verifying household income size, because this is another thing that can be a little bit confusing. So I just want to talk about this for a minute. A lot of times we know how many people are in the household because everyone's still living in the same home. But this is not the case for every student. So we want to make sure we're counting the right people. Basically what we're doing here is we're trying to show who has to live on the income that's on the FAFSA. That's what we're really getting at. So we're going to first count the student. It's listed as yourself. You list yourself in the household. Then we're also going to list any parents, including step parents, if they have a step parent, that's on the FAFSA. If the parent or step parent have to put income on the FAFSA, we're going to count those parents. And then we're going to list your parents' other children, even if they don't live with your parents. If the parents are providing more than half the financial support for them from July 1st to June 30 of the year you're going to be in college. So basically, we're looking at how many other people have to live on that income on the FAFSA. We're also going to be listing any other children, like they may not be living with your parents, but if they're in college and they have to list your parents' information on their FAFSA, we can include them as well. Now, here's a caveat to this that we don't often think of. Other children in the household might be an independent student. They might be like 25 years old, and they don't have to list parents' income on their FAFSA. If the parent is providing more than 50% of the financial support for that student, we're going to include them in the household count. So keep in mind what we're really looking for here is who has to live on that income. Okay, then we can include other people that your parents financially support. So I have a lot of grandparents who are living in the household. I've got a lot of friends who are maybe can't live at home because their home situation isn't great. If the parents in that household are providing their financial support, we're going to count them. And then of those people, how many are in college at least half-time? Caveat to that, we're not including parents here. So this is just anyone who is not a parent in that household who is in college more than half-time. Okay, so let's take a second and talk about special situations. There's a situation when someone is filing the FAFSA where they might qualify for what's called an automatic zero EFC. So that EFC is the expected family contribution. If someone qualifies for this special FAFSA calculation called auto zero EFC, their FAFSA experience is a little bit different. So what we have to do to verify them is a little bit, just a sec. How does someone qualify for auto zero EFC? So if their threshold is below a certain amount and they receive another benefit, another qualification, then their FAFSA is automatically going to have this zero expected family contribution. The criteria is a little bit different for dependent students versus independent students. I'll talk about that in just a sec. But the end result in this is the student is partway through the FAFSA, and once the FAFSA figures out they're going to get this auto zero EFC, the FAFSA stops asking them questions and allows them just to skip to the end and not have to input any more data. So their verification looks a little bit different, okay? So how does someone qualify? Well, if they're a dependent student and their parents combined adjusted gross income or income from work is less than $26,000 a year, this is for 2018 and it changes every year, and they meet one of these three qualifications. If they have anybody in the household that has received this federally means tested benefit in either 2018 or 2019, this could be Medicaid, SSI, SNAP, free or reduced lunch, TANF, or WIC. If anybody's got one of those in the last 2018 or 2019 years, they would have met this qualification. Or maybe their parents filed a 2018 1040 but didn't file a Schedule 1. And that gets a little tricky, so I put a little asterisk next to Schedule 1. We're going to talk about that next. So if they filed a 1040 but didn't file a Schedule 1, if they filed a tax form from a trust territory or they just didn't file a tax return because they didn't have to, maybe they met that qualification. Or either parent is a dislocated worker. So that would be like if someone's where they worked shut down and they no longer have a job to go to, they're dislocated. So like in Maine, we have mills that might shut down. That person no longer has a job to go to, they're considered a dislocated worker. If someone is an independent student, they have that same criteria, except the adjusted gross income is about the student and the spouse if they're married. But the student also, in order to qualify for this, must have a dependent other than their spouse. So that's just a little bit different. So let's talk about that Schedule 1 thing, because that gets a little tricky. So anybody with adjusted gross income under $50,000 is presented with this question on the FAFSA. Did or will you file a Schedule 1 with your 2018 tax return? Well, you're going to answer no if you just didn't file a Schedule 1. Maybe you just didn't need to, right? Or you can still answer no, even if you filed one, but only filed a Schedule 1 for these certain things. You had capital gains, unemployment compensation, an Alaska Permanent Fund dividend, educator expense, IRA deduction, or student loan interest deduction. If you only filed a Schedule 1 for one of those things, you can still answer no to this question, because that's going to keep you in the running for that automatic zero EFC. But we'd answer yes to that if they did file a Schedule 1 for a reason other than what we listed above. So that might be if they had a business or a farm. So that's kind of the caveat on Schedule 1. You can still answer no, possibly, if you filed a Schedule 1, but just for certain reasons. So I don't know about you, but that kind of threw me for a loop when we did this whole Schedule 1 thing. And I'm like, I'm not a tax preparer. I don't know if someone filed a Schedule 1. How do I know? A lot of times when students come to me to file a FAFSA, they bring just the 1040. They don't bring any other documentation. How do I know if they filed a Schedule 1? So here's the clues that we can piece together. I'm going to show you a screenshot of the 1040 on the next slide, but I just want to tell you these certain lines will tell you if the student or parent filed a Schedule 1. So if you look on Schedule 1, and if you look at, if you look at the 1040 and on line 6, you can see in the writing of the sentence, there's a place where it says, put the amount from Schedule 1 in here. If something's written in there, they filed a Schedule 1, you can take a look at that Schedule 1, or if you're in the financial aid office, you'll need to request that if they didn't send it to you earlier. Also, maybe they didn't fill in that amount on line 6, but if you add lines 1 through 5 together, and they're less than what's on line 6, they filed a Schedule 1. So this is a way to just realize if a Schedule 1 has been filed. They filed a Schedule 2 or 3. There's a checkbox on 11B or 12B. I'm going to show you that, where you can see if a Schedule 2 was filed. Sometimes that's for income tax purposes, that we need that for the FAFSA. Or Schedule 3, we need to verify education credits, and that's on Schedule 3. You can see if a Schedule 3 was filed, if 12B is checked off. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. So here's a screenshot of the 1040, and I've highlighted the areas that refer to other schedules that we need for verification. So you can see on line 6, it says total income, add lines 1 through 5. And then here it is, add any amount from Schedule 1, line 22. If something's written in there, we can tell there is a Schedule 1. Also, you can see where it's been, the boxes for Schedule 2 or 3 are squared off here in red. So let's talk about that FAFSA experience. What's that like for a student? When they're in the FAFSA, if they qualify for the Auto Zero EFC, it presents with this question. Do you want to skip the remaining questions about your and your parents' income and assets? So they're going to skip over a bunch of sections, a bunch of questions. And even if they don't skip it and they want to go input information, none of the information counted from here on out is going to be part of the FAFSA equation. It doesn't count. It doesn't do anything. So we always recommend people say yes to this. The reason we're doing this is to make it easier for the student to get their FAFSA done. But think about that information you have to verify. It's not going to be there. It's not even going to be required on the FAFSA. So what's verified for them is just a little bit different for someone who didn't qualify for this. So if someone is selected, or if someone is selected for verification and they have an Auto Zero EFC, this is what we have to verify. If a dependent student is put in either V1 or V5 tracking group, and we're looking just at income here, we must verify his parents' AGI if they were tax filers, and their income earned from work if they were non-tax filers. Period. Hard stop. That's the end. That's all we have to do to verify income. Either AGI if they filed a tax return, or income earned from work if they were non-tax filer. That's all we have to do for V1. Now V5, we're also going to need a copy of the identity, statement of educational purpose, and high school completion status. But as far as income, that's it. If you're an independent student, the student must verify, again, their income. So either their adjusted gross income if they're tax filers, income earned from work if they were non-tax filers, if they had any. And they also have to verify the number of members in the household just to determine if they have any dependents other than that spouse, to make sure that they really did qualify for that Auto Zero EFC. So that's it. Again, this is our most vulnerable population. this verification process and FAFSA experience was designed to be easier so we don't lose any of these students. So I made a chart, because you know I love a chart, and it just shows you as far as what we need to qualify, what we need to verify. If somebody's in V1, if they're a dependent student, we're just looking at parent income. If they filed a tax return, we need adjusted gross income. If they're non-tax filers, we just need to verify income earned from work if they had any. That's it. We don't have to go looking for the student's income. We don't have to verify all the stuff from the tax return. Easy peasy. Okay, so every year Department of Education puts out this verification tax return transcript matrix, and I think this is super helpful for me because it lines up all of the things on a tax return we have to verify, and it tells me what it looks like on that tax return transcript, because that tax return transcript is a little bit different from the 1040. It's written out a little bit differently. You can't exactly see what we're looking for, so they give you the verbiage that's on the tax return that we're supposed to verify. But then on the last column over, it'll tell you exactly what line from the 1040 that we need to look at when we verify that income. If there's an error on the FAFSA, the financial aid person fixes it, and then they resubmit the FAFSA for their eligibility. Okay, so now let's look at V4 and V5. These are students who have to verify that their high school completion status, where they got their high school diploma or equivalent, matches what's on the FAFSA. So we have to get a copy of that, either the diploma, we need a transcript from the high school saying when they graduated. Maybe we need a copy of their high set or GED, something from a foreign school that says when they graduated, and we need to verify what's on the FAFSA. We also have to have one person in the financial aid office who is designated to gather this documentation from students. They must appear in person with the financial aid office with a valid ID, so that's like a non-expired driver's license or passport. And they have to sign a statement of educational purpose. So this is something that says they are who they say they are, and that federal student aid, that they're going to get that just to use it for educational purposes and the cost of attending school. This wording is dictated by Department of Education. It is listed online in the Federal Student Aid Handbook. You cannot alter this text. What they design for this statement that the student's going to sign, that's what you got to use. Now, think about students who attend college online. Going in person to the financial aid office could be a little difficult. They may have to fly across country to do this. So they did say that Department of Ed has said that you could have it notarized instead of attending in person to do this. So just a caveat there. I'm always going to make a plug for special circumstances. So we know that the FAFSA takes a snapshot of what's happening with the family financially, but it doesn't always take into account every single situation. There may be some situations that aren't reflected on the FAFSA that I really want students or parents to reach out to the financial aid office and say, this isn't our situation, and it doesn't really reflect our family's ability to pay for college. So a situation might be like if you received a one-time income on your tax returns that you don't get every year from year to year. So take a look at, like, what if you had an inheritance? If that's on your tax return, sometimes with an inheritance comes legal fees, paying medical expenses. That income that you did receive is now gone. So it's not really giving a great reflection of what your financial situation is. So you can contact the financial aid office and they'll document what your situation really is. And the financial aid office can alter your FAFSA to really reflect what your situation is. There's also times that there's changes in the household or the household income. So what if someone in the household gets a divorce, or maybe they're separated, if there's a death in the family, maybe they've had a loss of income. Think about, the FAFSA, if we're going to start school in fall of 2020, we're looking at 2018 income, and that's a huge window of time for something to have changed. So I've had a lot of people say, 2018 was a great year for us, but that's not our situation now. So I always say contact the financial aid office and see if you can do an appeal. Maybe you've had huge medical expenses, or I had someone who had there was something that happened that destroyed part of their home, and they had a lot of expenses to fix that. Huge expenses that aren't common is another reason probably to appeal. And then there's also the last 3 bullets I have here are my students that I really want to make sure that we are working with closely. These are students that maybe aren't automatically considered independent students, but probably should be. These are often students who are navigating this by themselves, and these are people that we're going to lose in the process. So these are students who may be experiencing homelessness or are at risk of homelessness, emancipated minors, or maybe they have some situations with their parents that are awful, and they are just not able to provide parent information. These are the ones that we really want to make sure that we're forming a relationship with and really working them through this process. So always be in contact with the financial aid office and see what they can do. So what's new? There's always something new, right? Our jobs are never boring. Starting in September 2018, the IRS started redacting information on tax return transcripts. So they had been sending out tax returns and it had personally identifiable information on it. And we want to try and keep that safe if possible. So they started masking part of the SSN. They only showed the first 4 characters in the last name and part of the address. The issue with this is that, at a financial aid office, we sometimes receive thousands of documents. Somebody else opens the mail. We now have this random tax transcript that we don't know who it belongs to. So when we updated the 4506T form, there's a place where someone can put in a customer file number. Now, this is just a number that the customer, in other words, the student or the parent, can come up with that can tie that document to the student. So we always recommend putting in the student's ID number there. But just keep in mind, if you use any part of the social security number of the taxpayer, the IRS is going to reject this application and not send it. So just make sure that if you're going to use that customer file number, that it's not part of the social security number. More upcoming changes. So the 2019 1040 is out there. We can now start filing those. And the IRS took a lot of the information from the schedules and put them back into the 1040. So the number of schedules went from 6 down to 3. So verification for next year is going to be different. Taxes are going to be different, and filing the FAFSA is going to be different. So more to come there. Also, the IRA distribution question on the FAFSA had been 2 questions originally. It was put into 1 question. Now it's going to be split back into 2. But the biggest news of all is that 3rd bullet, the Future Act. I think this is going to be huge when it comes to filing the FAFSA. Verification is going to be a big change. And it's going to change if someone's trying to change their loan payment with an income-driven plan. It's a big deal. The Future Act did 2 things. It provided permanent funding for historically Black colleges and universities and other minority-serving institutions, and it amended the tax code so that the IRS and Department of Education could talk to each other more freely. It opened up more communication. It's going to allow more tax data to be shared when it comes to filing the FAFSA or doing those loan payment plan changes. So what that means is that it's really going to streamline the FAFSA application so that more information can come over from the FAFSA, from the IRS into the FAFSA. I think this is really going to streamline the process. They say it's going to make this more seamless. The student isn't going to have to do this multi-step process anymore. I'm not sure exactly what it looks like, but I think what is going to change is that you're not going to have to go out to the IRS website and manually request this information. I think it's going to be more behind the scenes. This is also going to reduce the number of FAFSAs that get selected for verification. So I think it's going to pull in more data, so that way we're going to know the information on the FAFSA is correct. And I think it's going to reduce the number of students that get selected for verification. So that's a win-win, right? It also is going to allow students that weren't able to use IRS data retrieval tool. This is both tax filers and non-tax filers. So think about if a student, when they're filing the FAFSA, could connect with the IRS and document that they didn't file a tax return, we wouldn't have to get that verification of non-filing anymore. So I think this is going to be huge. It's going to be a big deal, a big impact on both the student, the parent, and the financial aid offices, because it's designed to eliminate 22 questions on the FAFSA, which is amazing, but also it's going to reduce the number of students selected for verification. And I think that's going to be a big deal. So when is this going to happen? I think that is the number one question. My guess is this won't happen till fall of 2020. So we might see this on the next FAFSA application cycle. We'll see. There's a lot that has to happen on the back end technology-wise, so just keep your eye out for that one. More to come. I'm really excited about this. So what can FAME do to help with the verification process? In working with students, we learn that they really do struggle with completing forms. Imagine a student who got accepted into 5 colleges. They received 5 different forms. They're asking different questions in different ways, using different wording. We at FAME created these sample verification worksheets where we've really tried to reduce the number of words on that worksheet, and we tried to reduce the reading level on it. We're making a real effort when it comes to all of our documents to make sure it's very simple to understand. We work with a lot of families who maybe have English as a second language, or there's some reading disabilities that they're dealing with, or they're just not, they're just not savvy with the lingo that we use in financial aid. We have a tendency in financial aid to have this whole separate language. So we want to make sure that a 17-year-old who is doing this by themselves know exactly what we're talking about. So we try to create these worksheets and make them as simple as possible. You can request a copy from Mila Tappan. I put her email address there on the bottom. You can feel free to use these if you want. My dream is that one student who got accepted into 5 colleges had the same form. If we all started using a similar form, what if they just filled this out once and sent out a copy to all their schools? That would be amazing. This would make the process just a little bit simpler for those students. So feel free to let us know if there's any other way we can help make this easier for you, for students, for parents, for whoever. So there's all kinds of great marketing stuff on studentaid.ed.gov. I love a good infographic. I love to share this stuff on our social media. I invite you to do the same. This is just one of the infographics that shows just the steps in using that IRS data retrieval tool. I love a picture. I'm not a wordy kind of person. So these infographics really speak to me, and I think they're great to be sharing on your social media, because I think that's, it's a bite of information that I can easily grasp by looking at this. So lots of great stuff out there. Also wanted to note that FAME puts on a conference every year called Financial Aid 101. And with this conference, we have a Google site where we post documents that we use. We post our presentations and guidance that we have from the Department of Education. We put this all on this Google site, which is out there for you to grab, and we update it all throughout the year. So feel free to go and check out, if you have questions about something that's going on, you can see in the file for verification. I've got a bunch of the documents that I've used here today. So that stuff is out there as well. I always like to list on every slide where I talk about what the feds require. I like to post where you can find that so you can document that for your audit. But on the bottom of this page, there's a question and answers that I did not mention earlier. I think this is a great resource as well. These get more into the weeds, special circumstances that people have questions about. There's some great information out there to see, maybe something that we didn't talk about. So always look at the verification Q&As. I find it super interesting, but then again, I'm that kind of financial aid nerd. So if you're like me, go check that out. That's it for me today. Just wanted to say that Finance Authority Maine is a free resource to you. We're here to help get people through the process, and any way that we can do that, we're totally open to doing. So you can email me at education@famemaine.com. Go to our website. You can find free publications to download or request be sent to you. But also follow us on our social medias. We also are posting really timely stuff, like, when it's time to go through verification. How do I get through this, and what can I share with on my social media to help my students? Feel free to share any of our information. On the bottom, I wanted to mention that we have a YouTube channel, Fame Maine, where we have made these little short animated videos. We're kind of in the process of revamping right now because there's just been a couple of changes, so those always get updated. Feel free to use these. We got some great videos on like how to file a FAFSA or what is verification. And it's just a short snippet video to share with your students so that they understand what's happening. Again, thank you so much for joining me today, and I really appreciate everything that you do for your students. You really are making a difference in lives. So I really appreciate you, and I hope you have an amazing day.